introduce myself, Julia Waite. I recently joined MLA in the CN30 team. But to help our panellists with the conversation, I'd just like to do a little show of hands in the room. So who has had a conversation in the last 6 months with a producer where they've been asked for advice on carbon? Quite a few hands. Keep them up. And then if you've been asked for advice on producers as well, if you sought advice as well, hand up. How many of you, keep your hands up, felt confident in that you gave good advice, or you knew how to give good advice? Some ambivalent hands. Okay, that's good to know. And then last question, have any of the advisors or producers in the room been involved with a formal ERF project? One? Okay, cool. Well, that's good for us to know, and we'll definitely tailor it accordingly. So before we kick off with our panellists, one thing that Catherine was talking about this morning that really resonated with me was this need for big picture ideas and then also practical information and getting that balance right. And it resonated with me because I think it's a fair observation to say that there is a lot of noise around the carbon opportunity, both from wildly optimistic statements and claims through to quite negative perceptions around the carbon market. And all of that sort of leads, I believe, to this sort of cloud of confusion. With producers asking questions like, will I be rewarded? Will the market reward me if I invest today in low carbon solutions? But if I wait, will I miss out? And then for the advisors, how do I get started, talking to producers about this? Is signing up to a 25 or 100-year commitment in my client's best interests? And so if you like MLA, the demand for new but practical, tangible information around carbon, we can't, satiate the demand. It's just outstripping our ability to give solutions and give really practical advice. So I'm so excited. We've got two people who've lived the experience here with us today. And so I'm hoping that everyone comes away from the conversation with a little more clarity, feeling a little more empowered to engage in a conversation around carbon on farm. See if we've still got the clicker in action. Cool. So Mick set the scene nicely this morning, but the MLA has supported the red meat industry's goal to achieve carbon neutrality and reach net zero emissions by 2030. So we use sort of carbon neutrality as a shorthand, but we're always talking about our three main greenhouse gases: nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and the big one for us, methane. So what we're doing, we're investing over $120 million in emissions avoidance principally, so really knocking back the emissions as a consequence of raising livestock. That's going to be critical, change the moving goalposts for how much carbon we then need to store in our lands under management. We've got a great opportunity to do that as custodians of almost 50% of Australia's land mass, so we're really, really well poised. And we should be very proud of what we've achieved to date. And I think the red meat industry set itself apart as a real industry leader in ag, both committing to the target, but then in terms of tangible progress towards this goal. So we just announced last month the latest figures, almost 60% reduction from 2005 levels. Really, really great to see, but that investment into novel R&D is what's going to really we're going to really need that to kick that remaining 40% and get to that goal. So that's why we're investing in things like novel low methane feed supplements, more rapid soil carbon measurement technology, and improved genetics. We also recognise that adoption and rapid adoption is going to be critical to hit that target as well. But we know that no one's going to make a practice change unless there's something in it for farm performance and the farm bottom line. So in addition to the productivity co-benefits that I know Melanie and Cam are going to talk about today, what the other drivers for producers to engage might be to maintain market access, to engage in a low carbon or a branded product. And then lastly, of course, the potential for alternate farm revenue through the carbon market scheme and through sale of credits. So enough from me. We've brought these two wonderful people together today to share their experiences, both talking to producers day in, day out, but also exploring the opportunities with carbon farming. So Cam, would you like to kick us off with an introduction?
Oh, okay. So I'm a Riggy. I'm from Geelong in Victoria. We farm about half an hour outside of Geelong. We've got a small herd of 200 cows, self-replacing in about 1,000 ewes. I've also got a consulting business with my wife, which I've been in for 35 years. 35 years in advisory, first 5 years in the Victorian Department of Ag and the last 30 years by myself. I got caught up in the carbon game in about 2012, 2013, in one of the initial programs when there was all this hype and all this excitement around carbon and where we can make money out of carbon. And I looked at it from our own farm because I thought I shouldn't be advising anybody unless I thought it was fair and it fitted our farm as well. And so I've sort of been on this pathway for the last 10 years of trying to make carbon work in a farming business that's both profitable and not setting yourself up for some pain further down the track, particularly as you mentioned things around that permanency type issues. So that's the background. I'm not an expert in this field. I don't trade soil carbon or carbon credits or any of that sort of stuff. I've just tried to make it work for my clients that I've got and our own farm business.
Fantastic.
Hi, so Melinee Leather, family beef operation in central Queensland that I run with my husband and son and daughter-in-law. We've got 3 properties. We're certified organic, EU and grasslands, so predominantly breed and finished cattle for those markets. Dabbled in the feeder and live export the last few years though, which I'm sure most of the big industry did, due to the prices being so good. I've been heavily involved with the industry for the last probably 14 years. Had roles with AgForce, Cattle Council and the National Farmers Federation. I'm currently on the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, where we launched our report last month in Sydney, and I'm sure you've all read the cover to cover. And if you haven't, make sure that you do, because it's a great report about the industry. I also sit on the Regenerative and Soils Carbon Committee for Australian Organics and the NV2 Sustainability Committee for along with Lee and Dave. So another great committee to be on. I think our journey with carbon neutral began in 2017 when the red meat industry announced the goal of being carbon neutral by 2030. So our business really took that as an opportunity. We felt that to not only make a contribution to climate change, but also potentially, as Julia's highlighted, a diverse income stream, so all sorts of obvious benefits to that. So I think that's about where we're at.
Right. We'd love to drill down into what some of those co-benefits are and sort of how much ROI there could be there for producers. But first, just to set the scene, Cam, you mentioned a bit, you're not involved in the formal project space, but you're certainly a carbon advocate. So perhaps could you distinguish for us as a bit of a working definition for the chat, there's being carbon efficient as a farm, and then there is carbon farming for carbon credit generation. Can you give some colour to those 2 different things?
Yeah, well actually I'd probably separate them out into 3 things. And what I've learned is the levels to talk at. First of all is one what I call around emissions intensity. And that's simply understanding what's my carbon footprint. So for the livestock I've got on and the other practices I do, how much carbon am I producing a year? And then if you combine that with what is my output of product, whether it's beef or wool or whatever it might be, grain, whatever it might be, if you can put those 2 together, you can actually understand how much carbon does it take to produce a tonne of grain, kilo of beef and so on. So that's one level, and that's usually my entry level with a farmer when I'm talking to. Because we need to understand that first, get our heads around that first. Then I reckon there's a second level, which is around trying to get to carbon neutral and how we might get there. So the first one doesn't take or have to take into account sequestration. It doesn't have to take into account sucking up carbon, it's just understanding what you're emitting. The second one then starts talking about, well, what's sucking up the carbon to offset what we're emitting. And that ultimately is where you need to go if you're trying to get to carbon neutral. You've got to understand that balance of what we're emitting compared to what we're sucking up. And that's got some challenges, I think, at this point in time. And then the third one is around the carbon trading. Where people, first conversation wants to be, how do I make money out of carbon? And that one, I think, is far more fraught because of what I see in the long term is that we will need that carbon to offset against our businesses and where we position ourselves. And if you understand some of the schemes that are being offered, that permanency means that you don't have them anymore. If you sell them, they are mine. They're on your farm, you've got to manage them, you've got to keep them there, but you can't count them against your own operation anymore. So that's the higher level of risk. I think the first one, the emissions intensity, is very low risk and a really good entry point to talk about it. The other one's risk increases on the way through.
Yeah. Keeping with that theme, just high level, what are some of those emissions intensity activities that produce? We're probably not entirely different from the productivity tools we've got on display out the back there, but where would you start?
Yeah. The beauty I like about the emissions, there's a few things I like about entering the emissions intensity stage. The first one is the calculators we've got to estimate what your emissions are accepted around the world. They are free. One of them's on the MLA website, but there's a couple around there that are easy to access. You can actually understand how they work, and so you can actually see how that calculation goes. As far as emissions intensity goes, what we're trying to do is produce more product for less carbon coming out. And the simple way of doing that is to produce more from your animals. And there's lots of ways you can do that. Your grazing management can be better. Your soil conditions can be improved so that the grass grows more. Your genetics can be better. Your animal health can be better. It's a whole lot of things which I just reckon are good farm practice. And if you start trying to culling animals that are unproductive, culling animals, cows that lose calves, don't hang on to them for another 12 months and hope to rejoin them again. They're just a burden on the whole thing. So it's a whole lot of efficiencies that you can gain. And that's where we started in 2013. We started saying, where are the efficiencies we can get in our business? And we've driven our emissions intensity over the last 10 years down by about 15-20%, concentrating on that bit. And it's really low risk. It's just improves your bottom line, improves your productivity, it's adopting best practice, it's got all those sort of things. So it's not listing, we're not selling anything, not signing up to anything, we're just doing a better farm job.
No, great answer. And I'm going to come back to the carbon account piece in a bit because I think there is a big opportunity for advisors and to upskill in that area. We can't get enough carbon accounts done for producers, so bookmark that. Melinee, you've been spending the last, I don't know how long, 12 months really invested in some projects on your farm. Can you tell us a bit about how you got involved and what activities you're investing in?
Yeah, sure. So our journey probably started with the Method to Market project that we were involved with DAP, which, because we thought, oh yeah, carbon neutral, what are we going to do? How is the business going to position itself? Method to Market was a good start for us because it helped us to start thinking about where we were headed and how we were actually going to do that. So really good scientific advice that we were getting. We were then connected with SIBO Labs, so started using their technology. Also black box, so thinking about a herd inventory, all of those things started to, start to circulate with us. So then we decided we'd look at registering a project. So what do? We then, do a cost-benefit analysis to decide whether it's going to be worth our while and how we should go about that. So so on Barfield, looking at doing a soil carbon project, and Hazeldean a veg project, and what was the question again?
What activities you're doing?
Oh
so
yeah,
spot on.
activities. Yeah, sure. We're doing a lot.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that. So you obviously picked those for a reason. Those two methods for a reason. Could you talk a bit about the ROI you're perhaps expecting from the projects, or maybe some of the productivity co-benefits you might?
Yeah, sure. So, very challenging time because we're not experts in the field, right? So you're relying on other people to try and talk you through it. With the soil carbon project, the cost-benefit analysis has come out quite positive, so it looks like something that we would like to go ahead with, but we're very mindful of the fact that with registering a project doesn't mean that we're going to sell our kits or start trading our carbon. So we're very mindful that we're going to very likely need it for future market access, particularly because we do sell into the EU market, and I think that's one market that's really going to require that we have something to trade with that. I think our processes are going to be looking at their Scope 3 emissions, and then they're going to come to us and say, well, how are we going to meet our Scope 3 emissions? So I guess they're some really strong drivers as to why we're going down that pathway. But yeah, definitely the co-benefits are excellent as well. So, improving our productivity, improving our soil health, there's a lot of benefits there. But I think just being measured about the risks and really understanding what those risks are. And I think that's why we're registering the project ourselves as well, is that we want to have control of that. We don't want to be signed up for 25 years. It's a bit like a marriage, isn't it? You're in there for the long haul, so it has to work, right? And I think there's a risk there.
Any obvious standout co-benefits you received on the work we put in?
No, I think it's just cumulative. You get little bits from all of them, and when you put them together, they mean something. And I suppose the point is, if you focus on that, we're at a point now where we're probably, if we had to soak up all our carbon, we've got to soak up 20% less than we would have if we hadn't done those other things over the last 10 years before it. So the pool of carbon we've got to get rid of if we want to go to carbon neutral is smaller than if we hadn't done some of these things that have given us those productivity benefits on the way through. So that's why I like it. I reckon it's low risk, it makes sense, it's got good science behind it, helps everybody's bottom line. It's a good thing you can advocate in that carbon space. If people want to say, what do I do to get into this carbon thing? Just do that. Understand how much stuff you're putting out and understanding how efficiently you're doing it. Mm-hmm. I've just, as a side one, I've just got a project down south with a maltster who produces malt barley, or trades malt barley to Heineken. Heineken won't buy from them unless the suppliers that he's got are now doing their carbon emissions intensity calculations and looking to drive them down year on year. Just won't buy from them. So to me, that's where the market's going. Before we get to carbon neutral, which is a big step, okay, this carbon efficiency one is going to be the first cab off the rank. Yeah. And I'm seeing it more and more in markets, and the EU are driving that. The Europeans are driving that.
Yeah. And it's really positive that there's recognition for low carbon operation, it's not a zero-sum game, you're either carbon neutral or nothing, but we've seen the USDA has just announced a low carbon certification. So if you're a producer operating at 10% less the average emissions intensity, then the baseline, you can receive that certification to say that you're on the journey to be more.
Just one other quick comment. I'm not sure if people are aware, in New Zealand, by December 31 of this year, every farm has to have its baseline carbon emissions calculation done. That is every farm. Okay? And that's only 5 months away. So there are countries that are moving very quickly in this space, not to carbon neutral, but to do, this is what our farms are sitting at.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a really important point. You do need that starting point. So if you do nothing else, and once you register a project, you're actually not committed to go beyond that. You can just decide, I'm going to baseline, know where I'm at, look at land management changes I can make, or bird inventory changes that I can make to get me to a certain level. So I think that can only be of value to your business. Getting that baseline, knowing exactly where you are is really important.
I'm going to ask the question now to keep saying the word, the baseline. Yes, there are free tools online, but I would say that they're pretty daunting tools to approach and sit down and do yourself. If there are advisors in the room who are looking to kind of upskill in this area, what's involved with completing a carbon baseline? If advisors wanted to assist producers or provide that as a service, what's involved?
You're talking about carbon emissions baseline or carbon
to get.
Storage.
I see what you're saying.
It's
Yeah.
two different things.
Let's start at the easiest point. Let's start at the entry point. If I'm a producer or an advisor, I want to know what my emissions intensity is for my farm. Get that profile. Where do I start?
Go to the MLA website. The Excel tool.
Yep. The Excel tool is to support the Excel tool. What else?
So there's a short video that's been put together. Look, it's a little bit clunky because, and the reason why I say that is it works on seasons.
Yep.
So it says how many animals did you have over summer, how many animals did you have over spring. Now, if you sell your animals halfway through summer, then you're offloading that. You've got to halve the number of animals. So when you look at the sort of inventory, it doesn't seem right. You think, oh no, I had 100 animals there, boys, and then saying I've got 50. It's because you sold them halfway through that season. So it doesn't do it on months, it does it on season. A few little things like that that are a little bit sort of tricky, but a couple of hours online workshop and you'd be good as gold. I mean, I just learned it on the fly, just playing around, and you just learn it, So not that hard. The other side of it, the quantity of beef you turn off, then usually hopefully if you've got reasonable inventories at home, you've got that sort of stuff. I think it's a relatively easy entry point.
Yep. Melinee, is that your experience as well?
Yeah, sure. If you want to look at it in that regard, I'll speak to the soil carbon project in particular, and with that one, so baselining will be our going ahead with soil sampling and things like that. So really important if you're going to register the project yourself is to engage with really good technical experts. So we've engaged with Integrity Ag and Farm Lab to do our sampling plans and reporting. I think that's one of the key things is we can all be experts in the field, so we have to engage with the right people. So really question the science that you hear, because I think there's a lot of conflicting science, and surround yourself with good people. But question them as well. And there's enough out there that you can fact check a lot of what's being said. So, and I think that's really important. But getting on the ground, doing those samples, very expensive, as we all know. But there are some opportunities around at the moment for funding, if you're willing to share data and things like that. So I guess it's looking at the whole picture and all the things that are out there, all the people that are out there available.
All right, good. Questions are popping up here. Do save them. We want a lively, open forum at the end of this panel. But I'll segue into your experiences with the more formal emissions reduction fund, both jumping in and also holding back, Cam. So Cam, it wasn't a fit for you. Where did you get to in looking at the process?
A couple of things. One is that I think to get to the carbon neutral stage, the goalposts keep moving. So there's a few, in a sense, wrinkles that I think you need to sort out with this. For example, when I started doing calculations in 2014-15, what's called the global warming potential of methane, which is the main product that we've got to deal with from a livestock point of view, was rated at 21 times carbon dioxide. So in other words, everything of methane you put out, it got multiplied by 21 and compared with the carbon dioxide. So they talk about carbon dioxide equivalents. It's a bit the same as we'd use DSEs or adult equivalents to rate different types of stock on the same sort of basis. Since 14-15, it then went up from 21 to 25 times carbon dioxide, methane was. And as of last year, it went up to 28 times what methane was. So for a farm that I calculated in 2014-15, our emissions are now calculated as being 30% higher, even though we've got exactly the same number of animals on, because the world standards keep changing. And so if you're starting to think, how do I offset that? I'm going to offset 30% more carbon than I did 8 years ago. And so that makes it really difficult to make some of those sort of decisions. The other one that I think will come through that we need to keep an eye on is there's a group over at UC Davis in the US. And they're saying, and it's a true argument, that when methane gets emitted by an animal, it gets at the moment that global warming potential of 28 times. And it's assumed to be in the atmosphere for 100 years. the science is now telling us that methane breaks down to carbon dioxide in 12 to 14 years when it goes back in the atmosphere. We get pinned in our calculation at 28 times for the next 100 years, when in fact in year 14 it's 1/28 of what it was. Now, if you follow that cycle through, and then that one bit of carbon dioxide goes up in the atmosphere, gets sucked in by a plant, gets eaten by an animal, comes out and multiplied by 28 again. So the ruminant industry is just being cruel by this calculation, the way the world looks at the calculation at the moment for methane. And I reckon there'll be a few people that now start prosecuting that case and saying, hey, we need to change the way we think about that. The reason why it's all been lumped in the same basket is most of the new methane that's going out into the atmosphere is coming from the fracking industry. When they crack the ground and they start extracting coal or oil, there's a whole lot of methane that leaks out. Now that's new methane. It's not, it hasn't been going around in a circle like the animal stuff has been, growth plants that come back out. It's actually in the ground, so it's new being released. All being lumped in the same basket. Okay? And because of that, now if that changes, our calculations on emissions drop by 75%. So start to think about that. So if you were now calculating today and it was 1,000 tonnes, and they change that ruling on how that works, we may have to soak up 250 tonnes a year. Okay? Now that's a huge risk when you start saying, I want to be carbon neutral. Where do I actually settle? Because if you decided to do it, say, in planting trees, at 1,000 tonnes, trying to soak up 1,000 tonnes a year, and in a few years' time, you're only going to soak up 250, but you've bought 1,000 tonnes worth of soaking up trees a year. What do you do with the other 750?
Right.
Okay, so then you start getting into a different market. Well, are we farming that, or are we trading trees? And so people are going, oh, I'm not quite sure whether I should jump into that space because I'm not quite sure where that sits us. And I've had two producers, one that produces 1,000 steers a year, and he's got a block opposite him that's leading blue gums, just been chopped down, rang me up and said, do I need to buy that to offset the carbon in the future? He's got cash in his pocket. He said, I'll just buy 300 or 500 acres and just stick it back in the trees again and just use it as a soak up. And I said, well, what would you do if it was only a quarter you needed to soak up? He said, I'd be bloody cranky with you. Because you've told me, put 300 acres of trees in. I don't want to be farming 300 acres of trees.
But I think that's a good thing for producers to think about because it gives them flexibility. They might not need all those trees to be neutral, but they've got, opportunity to trade.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. So, but it's a different mindset to where they were, which was how do I go to carbon neutral? This is now, if I do this and the rules change, am I prepared and happy to be a tree trader?
Yeah.
For something.
Yeah.
And it's a different discussion.
Yeah.
That you need to have.
Can see how that influences the focus on emissions intensity as opposed to the project. Do you have any more comments?
No.
Are you happy with that? Very good. Not to focus on the negative still, but I'd like to come to another point, Cam, that I know you feel strongly about and a lot of producers feel strongly about, and that's this issue around additionality in the emissions reduction scheme. So at its core, the way the scheme is set up, many producers feel it doesn't reward past land improvement that they've done, and the people who've got more improvement to make are rewarded most by the scheme. So what do you feel about that panel? Have those producers who've maybe been best practice managers of the land, have they missed out?
I think potentially under the measure model method, they may, because you can look back the 5 years previous land management. So there's potential there, I think, Ken, for people to move into that space if they feel like they've done all they can do with their land. For us on Barfield, we've got some cropping country we want to convert to Lakina and pasture. So that's a really good one because we're doing a really big land management change, so a significant change. So I think even for producers that maybe have areas like that where they've got a little bit of cropping where they're putting in an oats, which we used to do oats or a lat crop every year, then we can now change that and look, it'll get some really big runs on the board. But yeah, I think that the new methods and models that are coming out are probably opportunities. Would you say, Ken?
Yeah, but then We need to separate out between what we call voluntary schemes, and they're growing at an exponential rate. Anybody can hang up a shingle and say, I can come up with a carbon method that I can sell to Qantas or I can sell to someone else, and can have different levels of integrity, different levels of measurement and so on. What Melanie's talking about are the schemes that the federal government has reached. So just got to think there are two. There's government-run type schemes, and then there's this whole voluntary market, which is just growing like topsy at the moment. And lots of different people aren't overly qualified selling the things that aren't necessarily legit.
Could be that bad marriage, 25 years.
I would never get past the courtship, I tell you. It's bloody awful. But what you're talking about are methods that have been established by the federal government, put into legislation. Now, to come back to your point, what they require is you make a change in practice of where you are now. And they have a list of things that you've got to tick off to say you are changing. So you're changing something, you're going from that more cropping type thing to a more pasture type thing, that qualifies. I haven't got a client yet, but when we go through, when we say which one of these are we going to change, we say, well, we've done all of those. So we no longer qualify. And the bit that really irks me is we no longer qualify, but the changes we have made are now going to be accumulating for the next 20 years. We just did them 2 or 3 years earlier. There's no way we can register that.
Under the measure model method?
No, because we have to make those changes. And so I've been back to the Clean Energy Regulator and I said, this just isn't right. And what's worse, I think, is that the industry is losing that opportunity to say we're storing carbon. Because all of those farmers that I know that are storing carbon, their gains are not being reported anywhere in any legitimate scheme.
Reason enough not to get started?
No.
No. Cool. All good.
The only other one that I'd say, and I've had 2 people now who didn't quite realise this, is that if you make a change in practice, and I had one fellow down in Tassie, he was putting irrigation in, and it was pretty average country, putting irrigation in, going to play Merivale, plant all those pastures, 365 days a year, you're going to grow free feed, and he did his calculations, and this is all the extra soil carbon I'm going to store, it's all the money I'm going to make. So what are you going to do with the green feed? He said, I'm going to run animals on it. And I said, you realise that the calculation's about net abatement. So while you're storing more carbon in the soil, if you're running more animals, those extra emissions from those extra animals comes off what you're storing. So it's the net bit in between the two. And that net bit cut it down by 70% of what he thought he was going to make out of his soil carbon. Because it's the bit in between, it's not one or the other. So, and go into it with your eyes wide open. He'll still go ahead with that project, he'll still do it, he'll still make a few dollars on it, he'll still run his livestock, but it won't be as big as he thought it was. So not a reason not to do it, just make sure you understand what the point is.
Cam, I think that's an interesting one because there's the increased production on that land in kilos of beef actually worth more than trying to trade the carbon.
Absolutely.
So it's still worth doing. So say he gets 30% of what he thought he was going to get out of soil carbon. It actually doubles or triples production. He's going to get profitability wise. So I think the other bit to look at is what's the actual net profit piece in addition to carbon, because what I think we have the opportunity to do is increase productivity as well as look at additional revenue streams, and they're not exclusive. I think they can go hand in hand. I guess I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one will go ahead, but we've talked it through, and really all I did was say, you understand this, you understand this, you understand this, we still go ahead. And on balance, when you looked at what you're going to make from improving that country, running more stock, doing those sort of things, it was a no-brainer in the end. But the carbon bit of it, which he thought was going to be a significant contributor to the overall picture, became much smaller. Not don't do it, but just realise that's only a smaller part of it. And then when he said, do I sell that and make money out of it? And we said, and so we started going down this path of maybe I'll need that one day to offset what I'm doing. And so then we started talking about banking those credits that you can then show over time that I've now got 10,000 tonnes that I've stored over the last 10 years. Now the market's asking me to relinquish some of those to cover off on the product I'm selling. And I just reckon that's the way to go. I think that the trading just for carbon's sake, I think isn't where the spotlight should be. The spotlight should be how we set ourselves up to store carbon so that we can use it as an offset, which gives us that market advantage. And so places like the EU that would be demanding that sort of thing, we've actually got some in their back pocket.
Yeah. To Melanie's point as well, maybe too valuable to trade, and the productivity piece as well. I'm really keen to open up the questions soon, so I'll just finish up on, let's talk about the bad marriage. So, Melanie, I would say you're an extremely unique producer in that you have lodged your own project and sort of gone it alone without the use of an aggregator or a carbon project developer. That we hear a lot of water cooler talk about. So, can you just share what's the role of the aggregator, and then why did you choose to go without?
Well, I think the real value of the aggregator to start with was that if you had smaller parcels, that they could bring people together and meet the quantities that were required. And then, of course, there's a lot of aggregators out there that are offering to do all of the administrative work, all of the soil testing. Some of them are claiming to, carry all the risk, for instance. They're giving you these really nice-looking figures at the higher end that look really enticing. And you don't have to do anything, but basically you're signing that over to somebody else. And I think that's where our business felt very uncomfortable, particularly for a 25-year period. We just weren't keen to give that sort of power to somebody else that was outside of our business. So we thought, well, we'll investigate it ourselves. And interestingly enough, I felt like the whole process was really designed for producers. The language that they use is really, you feel like they're talking to a producer, not a third party. So I think
emission reduction.
In the ERS, So as you go through that process, that feels like it's very much about you as a producer, not somebody else. So I think that, to me, that told me something. I thought it was designed for us. Why aren't we all doing this? So, but given there's certain aspects, you get to like the land management strategy where you have to engage a third party to do things like that. So once again, find those experts that you can engage to do that work for you, but you've still got control, and I think that's really important for such a long period of time. It's just, it's set up for producers, so I think that's the way that people should be at least attempting to go.
That's a really good perspective, and we know there's a lot of good operators out there. It just is a long-term commitment, so you want to do your due diligence, look at the balance between upfront costs, decision control later on in the project, and sort of balance those things when you're reviewing.
And I think, for anyone that decides to go with an aggregator, that's fine, but understand what you're signing up for. Be
Good
very
advice.
clear about that.
Great advice. To wrap up our component of this panel, this is where I'd love for you to leave, one piece of advice or just something you would love the audience to walk away from that we didn't cover, or that what you'd like to reassert.
Well, from a producer perspective, I would say have as you guys are all advising people, I suppose, but you want your producers to really have a clear understanding of what they want to get out of it. So our understanding for us was that we wanted, we thought about carbon neutral, that's a great thing for us to aim for as a business, but we wanted to have those activities for ourselves to potentially trade later on, and we wanted to make land management improvements. So we were really clear about those couple of aspects. So I guess, being clear about what they are after, surrounding themselves with the right scientific and technical experts, and probably they're probably my main two things.
Start with a business goal, like it?
Mine would be, don't get too hung up on being carbon neutral tomorrow. The goal's carbon neutral by 2030, and as I said, there are those wrinkles that we've got to iron out. And because of where I've been, I've seen things change pretty rapidly. And I would say in another 5 years' time, we'll be in a much better space from the livestock industry about how we calculate emissions, which I think will put us in a better position than where we are now. It's a bit daunting now. We've tried at home. Our farm, 10% of our farm's gone down to trees over a period of time. We've picked up cropping land which had low organic carbons, with the perennial pastures in there going to higher organic carbons. We were at one stage carbon neutral before they kept changing the rules and going from 21 to 24 to 25 to 28, and now we're not carbon neutral anymore. And that can be really frustrating when you think you're nailing it and you're not nailing it anymore because someone's changed the rules. So I'd look at it, your emissions intensity, it's a bit like a share that I reckon is a no-brainer, go buy it. So do your emissions intensity calculations. Carbon neutral by 2030, I reckon it's one of those shares to keep an eye on, because I reckon one day they'll be good buying, but they might not be quite yet. And I reckon trading carbon is one of those speculative things that could go anywhere. You might get a CSL or you might get an AMP. So, and you're buying. So.
Great closeout, Cam, as well, attaching it back to the target. It's an industry level target, so even at the MLA CN30 level, we don't expect all producers at the enterprise level to become carbon neutral, but we will need buy-in and adoption and that movement towards low carbon and more emissions intense operation to get there. So great closeout. Open for questions now, and yeah, I anticipated we'd have hands just rocket up. So Sally, you're good. We don't have any mics, so it doesn't matter.
I'll just point.
I'll just point. John here.
Look, I'd like to thank you for a really interesting session, but I think I'm more confused than I was an hour ago. And Melanie, I have read the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework update from cover to cover, and maybe the answer's in there, but I missed it. I'm fascinated by the first slide that was up there, 60% reduction in 17 years, and my question was going to be, how much of that is due to improvements in how we measure emissions? But then, Cam, you kind of really messed that up by saying change the rules, and where the industry's now worse off under the new rules than it was. And so my question was going to be around, is that 60% calculated the same way as it was in 2005, or was it calculated one way in 2005 and another way more recently, and is it actually worse or better than that figure would suggest, and how smart is it quoting that figure when the rules seem to be changing every day? My question is aimed at anyone who can answer it.
I don't think the measurements change, but a lot of that comes from the vegetation management in Queensland.
Yes.
In terms of how the reduction has been achieved, but you're right, we do optimise the emissions calculation with each passing year, or CSIRO does. It does work. Cam, do you have any other comments?
I don't know the numbers that they have been calculated on, but I suspect the trend would be the same. So whether it was calculated at using global warming potentials of 21 or 28, it's gone down. I don't think it's changed. I don't think they've changed the numbers all the way through. I think they've just used one number the whole way along. But I don't. Sorry, I can't answer. I don't know the actual calculation on those numbers as well. But what you've just nailed is exactly what's frustrated the hell out of me. Because I think I'm getting somewhere and I think I'm understanding it. And then those things change, and I suspect they'll change again. I have the Ipcc have these regular meetings every year or two, and all these really clever people sit around tables like this and all agree how the world's going to calculate and measure things and do those sort of things. So 10 years ago, this idea of that methane thing I told you about, that 14-year program, wasn't even on the agenda. Now it is. It's not resolved yet, but it's on the agenda now. So I think, and that's going to take a while for that to flush through.
We work with the tools we've got. As things get better, we revise. But
So, does the livestock industry have a seat at the table at the Ipcc, the one that you're just talking about, where they have this meeting every 12 months or 2 years, and the goalposts get changed? Are we at the table? Like, is our industry at the table?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Mick?
No, I'm not sure.
I know lots of clever professors are at it.
Yeah, but clever professionals,
Yeah, so don't know the answer to that, but there are people batting for us, I suppose, and this fellow, the group over in UC Davis at University of California, they're going in pretty hard on this because they're realising how it's sort of grueling the industry. And there's a couple of other things. So there's nothing at the moment. The cows are cows, effectively. And we know, and there's been some great work done in the dairy industry, that genetically there are differences in emissions. And we're now starting to get VBVs on those, particularly in the dairy industry. They're going really fast on that. So there are 20-30% differences based on what genetic selection you do. You know, they will be things that will drive the game pretty quickly.
So it's the methane that's released out of the fracking. It's methane, isn't it? So if the mining industry, which has way more money and way more clout than we do, if we were with them on this whole methane scenario, with getting the knowledge that we know now to get it reduced, you know, sometimes the big industry butts head with the mining industry, but here is a point where we've got mutual beneficiary and use their power. But Nick, are we at the table with the mining industry?
Yes and no. So I think the way methane is accounted for, particularly under the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory, is definitely being reviewed just because of the lifespan. So it's got higher warming potential, but it's a shorter lifespan in the atmosphere. I think the main difference, though, the livestock industry to mining is that we're offsetting emissions through the natural methane cycle. So I think the important piece for us as a livestock industry is the net position on methane. We have a stable herd or flock, we're sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere as fast as we put it in.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that UC Davis, Frank Miguano, just follow him because his tagline on Twitter is Greenhouse Gas Guru, GHG Guru, and he's phenomenal. So what we are doing is working on that as a pretty competitive issue globally.
Yeah.
We did a lot of work in the lead up to COP26 as well as the UN Food Systems Summit. And there's a forum in Ireland in October where we're looking at sustainable production and sustainable consumption and looking at all of the science and evidence from both a production point of view as well as a nutrition point of view of getting ahead of these issues as a global red meat industry. So I think that has a lot more power from my perspective than the mining piece, because I think we do need to separate ourselves from methane from burning fossil fuels as opposed to our natural system. That's probably the only bit that I temper with that, but I get your point on if there's commonality on methane and behaviour of methane in the atmosphere, that's one part. But I think our production system and working with the red meat livestock industry globally might be where we get the clout.
Yeah, the differentiation is that the mining industry is bringing stuff that's down there, that isn't in the atmosphere up there.
Yeah.
Where we make stuff
But if we can have they're still going to have to fight that for what they're going to have to pay anyway. Like they're still going to get hit with the bill. So it's in their interest to help to get the break it down from the 100 years to the 14 years. And that's where our game is.
But the benefit for us is if we're in a net zero position and we have excess carbon, because what we haven't, and I'm sorry I missed the start, but when we've commercialised feed additives that reduce emissions by, you know, in the lab it's 90%, so we're testing those now in large scale field trials and in extensive grazing systems. If we have feed additives that we can create carbon credits every day by feeding animal supplements, then we might be in a position where we have enough excess credits to sell to other sectors as well as offsetting our own. So that's a real game changer in that scenario. So look, it's just through this conversation, it shows how broad ranging and how diverse it is. So it's a big challenge for us all to get work.
Was there a couple more questions? Yeah.
You spoke a bit before about the work with EVs and that. So just wondering if you could, like, so are we progressing to where, you know, we can incorporate when we're running our SNPs on our herds, that genomics is, like, how far are we off about being able to use genomics in our decision making?
Yeah, that's a big part of the CN30 investment that's deployed now, but not at the fruition stage. So the best we work with currently is feed efficiency intake as an EBV, but we're hoping that by 2025 we'll have a EBV for low methane traits.
It's happening, but it's not as advanced in the red meat or beef industry as it is in dairy. Dairy stuff in Victoria is actually quite impressive how quickly they're accelerating that understanding those selections based on genomics. Yeah.
And the age, weight, turnoff, reproductive rates, all of those things contribute to.
Get them off grass. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the efficacy of the carbon system, but I wanted to know how you feel about the integrity of the system, given how you've mentioned the changes of the targets, and there's been significant debate about existing carbon projects that are dubious at best. And you've also spoken to exporting to a European market that would expect that carbon certification, and given that the general public will likely consume what they see in the headlines as opposed to the facts. Do you feel that it's there's high integrity to the system or not? Are you concerned about those sorts of things?
Am I concerned about it? Absolutely. Because the low integrity schemes get sugar-coated as though they're high integrity schemes, and they're not. And people are buying into them. I've had people ring me up, and Dan and I were talking with Morning Smoker about people wanting to sign up to a scheme. It's only when it went to the bank, because the bank had a mortgage on it and had to go on title, but they had to ring the bank, and the bank started asking some questions about it. Do you know actually what you're getting into, and how good is this so-called voluntary scheme that you're in? But those sort of things get uncovered. I think there's a real need, and a pretty urgent need, for organisations to set some sort of standard of integrity. And if the voluntary scheme doesn't meet that standard of integrity, then pretty easy to just warn, sorry, it doesn't meet the MLA standard or whatever else. Now, the MLA standard could be something that relates very closely to what the Australian government's standards are for ACCUs. I think that's quite possible to do. I should say the only one I've seen where schemes around the world have been compared is in the soil carbon space. There's an organisation called soilcarbon.org, and they rate all of the schemes on a whole lot of things: additionality, measurement, integrity around the scheme, governance around it, a whole lot of different ratings. The Australian government scheme that Melanie's signing up to is the gold standard around the world. It is the best that is there. One of the reasons why it's the best is because of the requirements to get them. You have to tick so many boxes, and that's why you've got to do so much soil sampling, you've got to do all this sort of stuff that everybody tears their hair about, saying too expensive, too much, whatever else. It is the highest standard. There are a number of schemes that are playing around in Australia at the moment, and they're right down the other end of the scheme, and they get caught out over it.
And I think, I just wanted to add to that, because I agree with what Cam's saying. And the really unfortunate thing, and I guess this could be a role for all of you guys out there who are dealing with producers, is I think that really vulnerable producers are the ones that are getting caught, because they're looking for that quick dollar. And you know, some of the modelling that you can get presented with looks quite enticing. And so that's really concerning me, is that it'll be the people that will get hurt the most that will get stuck. And once they're stuck, because you can't really get out of it. So, definitely big issues around integrity. Some people that are out there.
Please start a quick question and quick answers from the panel.
The science tells us that the global warming has happened in the last 40 years. Why don't we take our graft back for our livestock, our ruminants, back 40 years to the mid-70s, when we had 33 million head of cattle and 190 million head of sheep? We have not capitalised on that reduction in our national herd development.
As far as accounting goes,
Yeah.
But that's the people that sit around the round tables in the Ipcc. So this is where we start measuring from. This is where we measure to.
And that's one of the risks, and you might be able to add to this, is with changing the way that we measure things, is that shifting herd inventory can really influence that outcome. So, that's something that the industry has to be really aware of.
Yeah, the sheep industry are claiming that they're climate neutral as a result of that.
Yes.
Because of the flock reduction over time means that they're producing less methane today than they were 20 years ago, which is true, but it's just on flock numbers, whereas the opportunity for us is to grow productivity, regardless of the herd and flock size, that we can offset those emissions. And be an ongoing net position. That's the big opportunity where there's a lot of the things that we've heard are being implemented, support improving productivity, we're supporting soil health, we're improving livestock productivity and also delivering a better environmental outcome. That's probably the strength of our industry compared to others, I think. So, yeah, I think we can have our cake and eat it too in this one.
You've wrapped this up on a really positive note after a bit of back and forth on some of the pitfalls, so I'll leave it there. But thank you so much for